So I have to confess, as I was reading the gospel just then, I thought, man, I should have had something to say on the gospel this morning. But we'll get to all the weeping and the gnashing and all that kind of stuff another day. Maybe it's not as bad as it sounds like at first. But I want to preach from Genesis. So the major characters of Scripture are not always people that we admire for their upright moral behavior, if you haven't noticed. In fact, if the patriarch Jacob or the prophet Moses or King David, if they were teachers or physicians or lawyers in this day and age, it's safe to say that their certifications would be revoked on the grounds of moral turpitude, since murder, fraud, and adultery would probably fit in that category. Maybe even some of the stories of our faith could be woven together, made into a DVD, and rightly named Biblical Boys Gone Wild. Let's face it, we might admire the forerunners of our faith for the way that God worked through them, but we wouldn't want very many of them to date our children or our friends. In today's reading from Genesis, it's Jacob who has our attention. Jacob was ruthless in taking advantage of his older brother Esau. You may remember that Jacob fixed this wonderful smelling soup and had it ready for Esau when he came home from hunting. Jacob offered the soup to Esau on the spot for the price of his birthright, for all the extra property and material possessions that were due to the eldest son. And because Esau was tired and famished and vulnerable, he gave in, trading his inheritance for a bowl of soup. And as if all of that wasn't bad enough, Jacob went on to deceive his father. Jacob put lamb's hide on his arm so that his blind father would think he was speaking to the hairy brother Esau. And in this way, Jacob tricked Isaac into giving him the blessing that should have belonged to Esau. Now, not only was Jacob ruthless and deceptive, but he also had this enmeshed relationship with his mother. He had always been Rebekah's favorite. In fact, it was Rebekah who helped Jacob trick his father. And then, having heard that Esau was going to kill Jacob, it was Rebekah who decided that Jacob should go to her family and choose a wife from among them and hang out there until Esau calmed down. And so Isaac sends Jacob to Rebekah's family. And this is where our reading from Genesis picks up. Here, in the long-standing biblical tradition of God acting through those we would deem the least likely, Jacob the scoundrel takes center stage in the story of our faith. I wonder if it ever occurred to Jacob what he was giving up when he snatched Esau's birthright out from under him, or when he gave in to his mother's scheme to cheat his brother out of their father's blessing. Leaving his family to travel to his uncle's, leaving behind his home and everything that he knew, knowing that this was probably the last time he would see his parents. I can't imagine how alone Jacob must have felt as he set out on his journey, or when he lay down to sleep that night using only a stone for a pillow. And then Jacob receives this vision of a ladder reaching up to heaven, with angels ascending and descending on it, and God standing there giving to him the same promises that God had given to his father and his grandfather before him. I will give you land. I will give you offspring. I will be your God, and I will be faithful in what I have promised. It makes perfect sense that Jacob would want to mark that particular place, because no matter how messed up his life seemed, no matter how lonely he felt, for just a moment he caught a glimpse of a greater reality, that God would be with him wherever he went, even alone in the middle of nowhere with a stone for a pillow. That is the way that sacred places and sacred experiences, that's the way that they work in our lives. They are the places and the times when we're able to glimpse, even if just for a moment, the way that things really are. We're able to see a truth that is greater than any one moment or any one place, like the truth that God is always with us, that heaven is always closer to us than our own breath, that God will not leave us, but will accomplish in us God's purpose. Sacred places are sacred because they reveal to us a truth that illuminates our whole lives, making all the other times and places of our lives seem a little more sacred too. One sentence in today's reading that has stayed with me is Jacob's exclamation, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it." It's not coincidental, I think, that this revelation comes to Jacob while he's on his way to somewhere else, on his way to where he's going. Too often we tend to think that God will be waiting for us at our destination, not where we already are. And this doesn't have to be a physical destination. For example, if I start praying the daily office like clockwork, then God will show up in my life. Or if only I had the perfect family, a more reasonable job, or a more livable house, then I would feel blessed. Or if only I could find the right kind of prayer, enough time in my day, or become more spiritually adept, then I myself would see God. It seems that we're always expecting to find God in what comes next in our lives. And like Jacob, we're sometimes surprised when God shows up right where we are. In a sermon a few weeks ago, I spoke about one of the 3 foundational vows that Benedictine monks and nuns make, conversatio morum, and it means something like conversion of life, and it implies a willingness to change. Now, the other 2 major Benedictine vows are obedience and stability. Now, if there's anything that seems contrary to the way today's world works, it is a vow of stability. The average American family moves every 5 to 7 years, and technology changes our lives way more often than that. But the vow of stability has as its basis a profound theological truth, and it's this: God is always in this place, so there's no need to look for God anywhere else. Said even more strongly, if I can't find God where I am, I won't find God in the next place either. So I'm going to trust that God will bless me through this place, that God will draw me closer to God through the people and the circumstances of my life in the here and now. That's the vow of stability. Now, we can't necessarily live our lives in one place. Certainly Jacob didn't, although that was his own fault. But the vow of stability has implications beyond any one place, because the corollary is also true. If I can find God right where I am, that also means I can find God everywhere else as well. Because this place is sacred with God's presence, I know that every other place in my life's journey will be as well. It's what the psalmist knows, right? Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? And the answer is nowhere. It's what Jacob learned at Bethel, right? And it's what we learn each week at the altar rail. Communion or Eucharist is one of 7 sacraments in the Episcopal tradition, and one of the 2 that Jesus commanded that we do. Here we taste the goodness of God. We come face to face with God. We experience the presence of Christ. And experiencing God here helps us learn to recognize the presence of God outside these doors as well. Once we glimpse that here, helps us glimpse it everywhere else in our lives as well. See, the sacraments of the church were never meant to be the only ways we experience God's grace and presence. Instead, they point us to a sacramental life, a life thick with divine presence and divine possibility, so thick that, as Barbara Brown Taylor says, it's a wonder we can walk anywhere without cracking our shins on altars. It's a wonder we can walk anywhere without cracking our shins on altars. Finding God is not about finding God somewhere else. It's about becoming aware of God's presence right where we are. So here are some questions for the week. Where in your life right now do you see God? Where are the places and moments where you find yourself exclaiming, like Jacob, "Surely the Lord is in this place"? Honor and mark those times and places just as Jacob did. And then let them reveal the sacredness of all the other places along the way.